So Crow is based off of a Native American folktale that has literally been told in the oral tradition for hundreds of years. And it's told by many different Native American tribes and communities throughout the United States. And so when our director and our chief creative officer, Eric Darnell, kind of brought this story to our studio, we were just blown away by the sort of powerful themes that are inherent in the story. And these are themes that are really just as relevant today as they have been in the past. This story touches on themes of a hero's journey, of incredible self-sacrifice to save your friends and the world. But it also touches on themes of really accepting the imperfections that make each of us unique. And in doing so, being able to accept the imperfections and the diversity in each and every one of us, which I think, in today's world is a good thing to keep in mind. So before we dive into Crow, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background and perspective about Baobab Studios, where I work. And at Baobab, we are really coming together as a set of filmmakers who have spent our careers creating traditional animated feature film stories and narratives. There was a lot of talk in the previous discussion about storytelling, and that is really our background, as well as in interactive games. And so we came together about 3.5 years ago to take this collective knowledge and see if we could apply it to VR. And so far, what we've learned, not surprisingly maybe to this audience, but it was a little bit surprising to us, is just how powerful and how transformative a medium VR can be. And at the same time, also how really different it is from film and from games. And I think what that really translates is that we were incredibly humbled very quickly by what we didn't know, and that we need to be running as many experiments and failing as much as possible. And so to date, we've actually run 4 experiments. So we have created 4 pieces of VR content over the past 3 years: Invasion, Asteroids, Jack, which premiered at Tribeca Film Festival in April. And I'm excited to be talking to you today about Crow, where we're just showcasing the full version of Crow here at VIFF, which is really exciting. So before we start, I'm just gonna show you a short trailer for Crow.
There was a time when it was always summer and life for the animals was peaceful and worry-free. Then, one day, winter came to the forest for the very first time.
I don't like this.
Hey, we gotta do something.
Calm down. Someone must fly past the moon and the sun to where the stars dwell. To the one who creates everything by thinking.
Hello?
And convince him or her to make it warm for us once again.
Whoa.
I know he'll make any sacrifice to save us.
Let's see what you're really made of. Crow!
So one of the things, this is probably obvious, but obviously, this is not a VR piece. This is a 2D video that you're seeing, but all of the imagery that you're going to see throughout this is really just captured directly from a headset. Of course, in this case, it's nicely edited by an editor. But apart from the titles, this is all just captured from our VR piece. And at the same time, it doesn't really kind of capture what it means to kind of be in the experience. So I urge you this week to go and see Crow, as well as all these great other experiences that you're going to hear about. So Crow is really our most ambitious piece that we've done to date. And there's lots of things that I could be talking about today, but I actually have a limited time. So don't worry, I'm not going to cover all of this in 20 minutes. I'm just going to focus in on one area of this, which is the building connection with character and interactivity that entails. And I think this is one of the areas that really is what makes VR unique and really allows us to tell stories in different ways. And so, storytelling in VR really, even though VR has been around for 50 years, it really is a new medium with respect to how we tell stories. And from our experience, one of the most important things is that we have the ability to make you connected with the world. And I chose these words very specifically because this is actually a very strong indigenous worldview. And one of our Native American partners, Sarah Eaglehart, uses this as a way of explaining their view of the world, that as humans, we are all connected to the world around us. And at the same time in VR, we have that ability to connect you with the world in a different way than when you're seeing a film or you're playing a game, because we can place you directly in the story. And what we've been excited about is not just placing you in the story and having you be a passive observer, but giving you a role to play. In Invasion, you actually are a little bunny, and you're on on an ice area, and another bunny hops up to you, Chloe, at the beginning of the piece, and looks you directly in the eye and is right in your face. And at that moment, everyone not just looks at Chloe, but they start reacting to Chloe as if she's real. And that was kind of like this real aha moment for us, that by having a role to play, by being part of the story, that you could really create an experience that was actually quite unique and different and really profound. And also, we have the ability not just to place you in the story and give you a role, but to actually participate. And so in our second piece, Asteroids, you're a little helper robot aboard an alien spaceship, and you got like helper arms, and you can actually help the aliens out on their journey. Obviously, you are immersed in the world. You can look anywhere. You can be part of this world, and we can make worlds come to life, which of course is why animation in VR is really a great marriage, because animation is all about taking you to fantastical places and making them sort of seem so real you can reach out and touch them. And that's also a nice definition of VR. And so we were always excited about this marriage of bringing animated worlds to life in VR and bring stylized worlds to life. And finally, characters can actually acknowledge you in real time. They can actually acknowledge your presence, and ultimately that means that you actually matter in this world. So there's a lot of things that are really exciting about telling stories in VR. And so today, I'm gonna talk about 3 aspects of how we did this on Crow. So first, I'm gonna talk about identity and role, about interaction mechanics, and finally, about this idea of interaction is narrative. And if you think about this, this is really, your role is really the who. The mechanics is how you actually engage in the world. And interaction is narrative gets at the why the interaction helps the story out. So in Crow, we actually gave you the role as the spirit of the seasons. And so basically, the idea of Crow is that the forest animals are on Earth in this incredible, idyllic life. It's always eternal springtime. And then one day, winter comes upon them, and they think they're gonna freeze to death. And that is kind of the inciting incident for the story taking place. And so we thought, as creators, wouldn't it be cool if you were actually the agent of change, if you were the spirit of the seasons that at the very beginning of the piece brings about this idyllic springtime, and then you were the one who creates winter and pushes the animals on their journey. So, along with this role of the spirit of the seasons, then we start thinking about core mechanics, how you're going to actually interact in this world. And this gets into elements of traditional game design. So in a game, everything is layered on top of a single core mechanic, which is how you're going to interact. And then you start layering complexity, and you start layering worlds and everything on top of that. And we do the same exact thing here, where we want to create a core mechanic that, first of all, in this case, is intuitive and fun. And so for us, intuitive is really translates to, we want it to be effortless and as easy as possible. We actually have had a lot of experience from Asteroids with using these hand controllers that are on all these devices, and quite honestly, they're really complicated. There's all these different buttons and things that you can press, and we spend a lot of time fighting to make the experience simple enough that it wouldn't overwhelm a new viewer or to VR. And in fact, most of the people that are using our experiences are brand new to VR. Most of the world has not experienced VR to date. And so we want something that's accessible. And at the same time, we wanted something that was inherently fun. We also wanted a mechanic that was actually versatile, that could really expand. So it starts out simple, but we had lots of different interactive beats throughout our story. And we needed it to be able to expand to these different beats that would have slightly different requirements. So our solution, and this sounds really obvious and easy, was just simply to allow you to wave your hands. And so, by waving your hands, we want to have magic fly off your hands. And so that could be snow emanating from your hands. It could be magical wisps. And from the very beginning, our director, Eric, was like, I don't want you to have to press any buttons. I want the hand controller to really just kind of fall away. And ideally, if we were in a more futuristic world, you would just be tracking your hands. You wouldn't need a controller that you're holding onto. And in fact, what's funny is, we do a ton of user testing, and you'll sort of see that throughout my talk. I'm going to keep talking about the importance of user testing. And what we found is that our product people were like, you're going to need to press the button because obviously, if you want it to snow, you're going to want to press the trigger to actually make it snow. And so we did all this, sort of user testing with these different techniques. And we actually found that people, just by waving your hands and not having to think about what all the buttons on the controller, it was much easier for people to understand and to really grok. So the first interactive beat that we tackled was this transition to winter. And our head of interactivity and our head of effects, Scott Peterson, was super excited when he joined the project to basically have real-time snow effects coming out of people's hands. That was just like the coolest effects thing you could work on. And so this is actually the transition
But then one day,
to winter.
the spirit of the seasons decided it was time to bring the very first winter to the forest.
So that seems pretty simple. At the same time, there's a lot of effort that goes into especially getting people to actually act and to tell them and cue them in that there's something to interact with. And so I'm going to play this again, but I'm going to highlight all the different modalities that we actually used to trigger to you that it's time to actually act and do something.
But then one day, the spirit of the seasons decided it was time to bring the very first winter to the forest.
So what's interesting is that we're actually going down at least 5 different avenues of getting you to realize that there's something to do. So at the very beginning, we actually have narration telling you that winter's coming. We then change the colors of, those are tree branch hands. They're meant to be sort of abstract branches. We change them from kind of a spring color to winter color. We add in visual effects coming off of your hands. We also have haptics, so the hand controllers start vibrating, and we add in specific sound effects to tell you that it's time. The other thing that's not in this is we actually repeat this process. So we can detect whether or not you've actually interacted. So if you don't move your hands, then in a few seconds, we had our narrator, Randy, is an 82-year-old Native American tribal elderly, sort of statesperson. And so he's been one of the people who has made sure that we've stayed true to the story. And, it's just like adds this gravitas. And we had Randy do all of these different takes. And so he'll be like, come on, wave your hands. And so we have 4 or 5 of these that we keep prodding you. But we'll do the same thing. We'll actually then bring the haptics back up. We'll add more visual effects and sound effects as well. And once we started kind of fitting these in a nice way, everyone interacted. And then once you start interacting, everyone has a lot of fun. So this is something, we used to have a standalone demo and people would just continue to want to make snow. It's something that is pretty strangely addicting. So the next thing we tackled was bringing spring about. And so what you're going to see here, there's a number of these little buds that are playing. So the buds are these little dots, and then as you sort of move your hands, these wisps will actually create flowers and make the flowers bloom from the buds. And so this ended up being a little bit more challenging because it got into this problem of it took skill to actually make the buds grow. So you would actually wave your hands and then the wisp would fly off and not hit any of the buds. And so people felt like they didn't complete anything and it was like a task, and that wasn't what we were going for. Like, we're really not trying to create a game of skill. Like, there's lots of amazing video game VR pieces where it's all about building skill. That's not what we're trying to do. And we ended up adding in this targeting approach where the wisps sort of magically find their targets. And not only did that make it so that the flowers bloomed really nicely, it also added a magical quality because all of a sudden the wisps sort of had a mind of their own. But that is an example of how we start out with a simple mechanic and then we start augmenting it for each of these specific interactive beats. So probably the most expansive use of interactivity on this project is taking the hero character Crow on this magical journey from Earth to find the one who creates everything by thinking to bring warmth to the forest animals. And we were lucky enough to have Oprah Winfrey play the one who creates everything by thinking, which is, I think, very appropriate. And we wanted to have this musical journey be something that not only were you propelling Crow on this journey, but we wanted it to be a musical montage where you could actually create music. And so, most importantly, Eric was like, you can add to the music, but please don't ruin the music. I don't want it to sound like crap. And one of the things that meant was that we always had to hit notes on the beat. So the idea is you have these wisps that come out of your hands, they hit elements that are in this magical, sort of space scene, and then that actually plays music. But most importantly, Eric was excited about this idea of you being the conductor. So you actually feel like you're conducting the music. And we really spent a ton of time trying to achieve that. I hope we have. You can tell me afterwards whether you think that we have. And so there's a lot of interesting paths that we went down, but in the interest of times, I'm just gonna focus on one of them, which is getting that feeling like you're conducting. And so one of the early problems that we had was that we called this the crack the whip problem, where people would just want to act like they're cracking a whip. So what would happen is you see here that this is a user test where a user is actually throwing out wisps. They sort of emanate from your hand, and because they go in a straight line, it just encourages you to just do as many as possible. And it just feels like you're going. So this took a lot of time for us to figure out how to solve. And this probably is obvious in retrospect, but it wasn't obvious to us when we were doing it. So we were getting you to wave your hands. That was the core gesture. And we wanted to reward this wave-like gesture that you had. And so the key insight was that we needed to add guidance. So the idea being that after the wisps lead your hand, they still follow the motion of your hands. And so this is an example of what happens once you've added in guidance. And you can see here that this really encourages you to actually move your hands in a really nice way. The funny thing is we did an early user testing with the crack the whip approach, and it was something like 6 out of 7 users did the cracking the whip, and one person was able to do it really nicely and had this very sort of effortless, and we were like, wow, one person really gets it. But it turned out that person was a ballet dancer. So they had inherent rhythm and grace to them. So I wanted to show you one section of the space sequence where we put all of this together that we're talking about. And so this is a section where there's an asteroid choir that will sing to you. And so the idea is that you have a bunch of asteroids, they're in 9 sections, and as you activate each section, then the asteroids will turn around and sing to you and layer on music. And so if you do nothing, you'll just get a bass track, but there's 9 orchestrated sections that are meant to layer on top in interesting ways. So the last part I want to talk about is we've kind of given you a little taste of how we build the ingredients, of like what your role is, how we actually build up the way that you can interact in the world. But the question is how does interaction relate to the narrative? And if you're not careful, interaction can really fight the narrative. And we've had lots of experience where we've added in interaction things that distract you from paying attention to the story. And so ultimately what we found is that interaction is narrative. Interaction needs to be on the same structure as the narrative structure and underscoring it. And so what I mean by that is that if you think about narrative, it's a series of connected events, but in a very specific way. We are very accustomed to telling stories in a 3-act structure. You have a beginning, a middle, and end. You have an inciting incident, rising action, a climax. And in the same way, we want that interactivity holistically to function and underscore those key moments. So at the very beginning of Crow, you actually bring winter. You propel the animals on their journey. That is the inciting incident of the story. In the middle, you go on this magical journey with Crow. And at the very end, I'm not going to actually spoil the ending for you, but you actually help with the resolution of the story as well. But of course, there's lots of levels to the narrative. And so if you think of your story, you have your 3 acts, but then if you actually take one of the acts or one of the scenes, they also have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's how we go about writing and telling stories. So similarly, in our narrative, a single interaction also has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so we invite you to actually participate, to actually do the interaction. You actually do that interaction, and then we acknowledge that it's complete. And this is also something that we did not learn up front or like have some grand design. We learned this through failure. And one of our advisors, Tim Letourneau, who's like a really experienced and well-recognized game designer, was playing our experience and was like, I just don't ever feel like I've finished. And I just, it makes me uneasy. And I don't know like when I'm supposed to stop interacting. And, in games, you always kind of have that beginning, middle, and end to what you're doing. And so that really was a key insight for us. And so I'm just going to go back to our snow example. And if you think about it from this perspective, I've actually talked to you a lot about the first 2. I've talked to you about all the different ways that we go about inviting you to act. And then you saw that you actually make snow. But what I'm going to show you here is that the end where we actually acknowledge that it's done.
And so it was that the very first snows fell.
See at the end there, what happened is that big flurry of snow. There's actually vibrations on your hand, there was a sound effect, and then there was also narration to say, hey, this is over. And so we actually ended up going back in and layering all of these beginning, middle, and end, so there's a completeness to each thing. And at the same time, we actually, I'm not going to talk about it here, but we do have interactivity throughout the piece. That was another thing, is we didn't want to feel like you're turning anything off. It just may be more passive interactivity in certain points in the narrative. All right, so I just wanted to conclude by, sort of giving you a little bit of our learnings. And I think, the biggest learning for us is what I mentioned at the beginning, is this concept of that we are all connected. And I think we were all really moved as we heard, one of our partners, Sarah Eaglehart, talk about this concept as it relates to indigenous worldview. And at the same time, it was like, wow, this is actually a really powerful way of thinking about VR. And it kind of crystallizes a lot of the thoughts that we've had, and so in VR, we really have this great opportunity to connect you with the story and to make you a part of that as the viewer. And so that is really powerful. And so, when we started our company, I think I was blown away by this idea that we can immerse you in the world, but it's so much more than that. We can give you a role to play. We can actually connect you to the environment, connect you to the characters, and have that world and the environment and the characters all acknowledge that you're there. And in doing so, that actually gives you this sense that you actually matter in this world. And at the same time, as filmmakers, we have spent our lives kind of evoking empathy. which is one of those buzzwords for VR. This idea that we can, make VR an empathy engine. And that is cool. Like, we want to be able to do that. But VR also has this opportunity to make you really care and be able to be part of the solution and be part of that story in a meaningful way. And so I think that's what we're really excited about as a studio at Baobab. And we're really excited for you to be able to check out Crow while you're here this week. And thank you so much for your time.